Hey everyone. Tonight we're going somewhere cold. Not a little cold. Not forgot your jacket cold. We're talking about a place where exposed skin freezes in under a minute, where your breath doesn't just fog, it crackles, where the darkness lasts for months, and the only company you've got is a handful of fellow scientists, a wall of instruments, and the most indifferent landscape on Earth. You're going to experience a day. A single, ordinary day in the life of a weather observer at an Arctic research station in 1954. His name is Frank Hollis. He's 27 years old, a meteorological technician with the United States Weather Bureau, stationed at a remote observation post on the north coast of Alaska. And today is just another day of recording temperatures, launching weather balloons, and trying not to let the isolation drive him sideways. So before we begin, take a moment to like the video and subscribe if you enjoy this kind of immersive history. Let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is. And especially if you've got connections to Arctic service, weather observation, the military bases up north, or the early Cold War research stations. Those of you who worked in meteorology, served at remote posts, or remember the distant early warning line and the era when we were building our eyes and ears across the top of the world. I'd love to hear how this compares to your experience.
Now settle in, get comfortable, and let's step back in time together. Close your eyes if you want. You're about to live a day that someone actually lived 70 years ago. Chapter 2. Before Dawn. Waking at -40. I wake up to the sound of the alarm clock, and for a moment I have absolutely no idea where I am. This happens every morning. There's that half second where my brain hasn't caught up, and I could be anywhere, back in my mother's house in Duluth, in my old dorm at the university, in the barracks at Chanute Field where I did my Met training. Then the cold hits the tip of my nose and I remember Alaska, the station, 4 in the morning, January. The alarm is a cheap wind-up job, a Westclock's Big Ben with a tick loud enough to hear from across the room. I've grown to hate that tick with a quiet, intimate passion, but it works. It always works. I reach over and silence it before it can wake Hendricks in the next bunk. Though Hendricks could sleep through an artillery barrage and has in fact done exactly that. He served with the 7th Infantry in Korea and claims he once slept through a mortar attack outside Chosin. I believe him. The man sleeps like the dead. I sit on the edge of my cot for a moment and look at the window. You can't see through it. The frost is an inch thick on the inside of the glass, built up in these intricate fern patterns that would be beautiful if they weren't a constant reminder that the air outside is trying to kill me. The thermometer on the wall reads 62 degrees Fahrenheit. That's the inside temperature. Near the heater, near the floor, where my feet are about to land, it's probably 45. And outside? The last reading I took before bed was -38. It's probably dropped since then. I swing my feet down and the floor is cold even through the wool socks. I've learned to sleep in 2 pairs. The floor is plywood, laid directly over the insulated platform that keeps the building off the permafrost, and it radiates cold like a living thing. The whole station sits on stilts, wooden pilings driven into the frozen ground, because if you build directly on permafrost, the heat from your building melts the ground beneath it, and within a year or two you're living in a slowly sinking, tilting, cracking disaster. The Army learned that lesson the hard way at several early installations. We benefited from their mistakes. I get dressed in the dark. Well, not the dark exactly. There's a single bulb on the ceiling, maybe 40 watts, that I switched on when the alarm went off, but it might as well be dark for all the cheerfulness it provides. I pull on my heavy wool sweater, then my flannel-lined trousers, then I sit back down to lace up my felt-lined boots. The boots are the most important piece of equipment I own. More important than the barograph, more important than the radio, more important than the theodolite I use to track weather balloons. If your feet freeze, you're done. That's not a figure of speech. That's a medical fact. At -40, exposed flesh suffers frostbite in minutes. Your boots are your life. Those of you who served in Korea know exactly what I'm talking about. The cold over there was legendary, but at least in Korea the cold came and went with the seasons, and you had some idea when spring was coming. Up here, winter just stays. It settles in around October and doesn't leave until May, if you're lucky. And even then, leaving is a generous word for what happens. The snow pulls back, the sun comes up for longer. But warmth, real warmth. That's a memory I hold on to from my last leave in Fairbanks. And even Fairbanks in summer isn't what anyone from the lower 48 would call warm. I step out into the corridor, and the temperature drops at least 10 degrees. The corridor connects the sleeping quarters to the main operations room, and it's not heated, or rather, whatever heat leaks in from either end barely makes a dent. My breath fogs immediately. The fluorescent tube overhead buzzes with that particular high-pitched whine that becomes the background music of your entire existence up here. You stop hearing it after a while, or you think you do. Then you go outside into true silence and realize just how loud that buzzing was. The galley is my first stop. It's barely a room, more of an alcove off the corridor, fitted with a propane stove, a hand-pump sink, and shelves of canned goods that constitute our entire culinary universe. I light the burner under the coffee percolator. This is the most important act I will perform today, more important than the weather observations, more important than the balloon launch, more important than the coded transmissions to Fairbanks. Coffee comes first. Coffee always comes first. The percolator is a standard-issue aluminum job, dented on one side from the time Peterson dropped it during a storm last November, and it makes coffee that tastes approximately like hot water filtered through a boot. But it's hot. It's caffeinated, and at 4 in the morning at -40, those are the only two qualities that matter. While the coffee percolates, I eat breakfast. Breakfast is a generous word for what actually occurs. I open a can of Spam, cut off 2 slices with my pocket knife, and eat them cold on a piece of pilot bread, that hard cracker that's been a staple of Arctic provisions since before I was born. Those who served in the Pacific will remember this stuff. It doesn't taste like much of anything, which this early in the morning is actually a virtue. I follow it with a spoonful of peanut butter straight from the jar. The peanut butter is frozen to approximately the consistency of cement, so spoonful is optimistic. It's more of a peanut butter-flavored ice lump that I let melt in my mouth while the coffee finishes its work. Luxury. Thy name is cold peanut butter at 4 in the morning. The coffee is ready. I pour a cup and wrap both hands around it, and for about 30 seconds I just stand there. The heat soaks through the tin into my palms and I close my eyes, and that warmth is the finest thing in the world. Better than sleep, better than mail from home, better than the moment when Fairbanks confirms they received your transmission and you know the radio hasn't frozen solid again. Next time you pour yourself a cup of coffee in a warm kitchen, with the lights on and the heater running and the world going about its business outside your window, think about this. Think about a man standing in a plywood box at the top of the world, holding a dented tin cup like it's the only thing keeping him alive. Because some mornings it is. I carry my coffee down the corridor to the operations room. This is where I spend most of my waking hours. It's a room about 12 feet by 16, crammed with everything the United States Weather Bureau decided a remote Arctic observation station requires: a radio transceiver, a barograph, an aneroid barometer, a psychrometer, shelves of blank observation forms, a typewriter that jams when the ribbon gets too cold, and a coal stove in the corner that is, without exaggeration, the beating heart of this entire operation. If that stove goes out, the instruments freeze. If the instruments freeze, we can't take observations. If we can't take observations, there's no point in being here, so the stove stays lit, always. Tending it is a shared duty, but at 4 in the morning it's my duty, because I'm the one on the dawn shift. I open the stove door and check the coals. Still good. I add 2 shovels of coal from the scuttle and adjust the damper. The stove is a temperamental thing. Too much draft, and it burns through fuel too fast. Too little, and the fire smothers. You develop a relationship with it. You learn its moods after 6 months. I know this stove better than I know some members of my own family. I know the sound it makes when the coal catches properly, a soft, almost contented roar, and the sound it makes when something's wrong, which is a sulky, hissing complaint that means the flue is icing up again and someone's going to have to go outside and clear it. I set my coffee on the desk and check the barograph first. It's a beautiful instrument, brass and glass, with a stack of aneroid capsules connected to a stylus that traces pressure, changes on a rotating drum of graph paper. The trace shows a slow but steady drop over the past 12 hours. That means a system is moving in. Not unusual for this time of year, pressure systems sweep across the Arctic basin with the regularity of freight trains, one after another, and our job is to document every one of them. I note the current reading in my log. 29.42 inches and falling. I'll compare this with the mercury barometer reading during my first formal observation at 0500. And that brings me to the point of all this, the reason I'm here, the reason anyone is here at this frozen outpost at the top of the world, the observations. Chapter 3. The 5 a.m. observation, reading the Arctic sky. Every 3 hours around the clock, one of us takes a complete surface weather observation. Temperature, dew point, barometric pressure corrected to sea level, wind speed and direction, cloud cover, type, height, and percentage of sky covered, visibility, present weather, and any remarks that might be relevant. It sounds straightforward on paper, and in temperate climates it more or less is: you step outside, read your instruments, look at the sky, write it down, takes maybe 15 minutes. Up here, it's a production. Up here, every observation is a small expedition into conditions that are actively hostile to both you and your instruments. The preparation for a 5 a.m. observation begins at 4:50. I put on my parka, a military-issue job, canvas outer shell with alpaca lining and a synthetic fur ruff around the hood that's supposed to protect your face from wind. I pull on my outer mittens over my wool liner gloves. I wrap my balaclava around my face, leaving only my eyes exposed. I check my flashlight. Batteries die fast in extreme cold, so I keep it inside my parka against my body until I need it. And I grab the clipboard with the observation form already partially filled out, because you do not want to be fumbling with paperwork outside when your fingers have about 3 minutes of useful dexterity before the cold shuts them down. I open the exterior door and step outside. The cold hits me like a wall. It's not a metaphor. It physically pushes against you. The air at -40 has a density, a weight that warm air simply doesn't possess. I feel it press against the fabric of my parka, against the tiny strip of exposed skin around my eyes, against my lungs the moment I take my first breath. And that first breath, that's the one that always gets me. The air is so cold that it feels like inhaling broken glass. Tiny ice crystals form instantly in your nostrils, in your throat, and your body's first instinct is to cough, to reject this air, to go back inside where breathing doesn't hurt. But you don't. You breathe shallow, you breathe through the balaclava, and you keep walking. The station is quiet outside. That's the thing about the Arctic in winter that you never quite get used to. The silence. There's no wind tonight, which is a blessing and a rarity, and without wind there is simply nothing. No birds, no insects, no traffic, no distant hum of civilization. Just the crunch of my boots on the packed snow and the sound of my own breathing inside the balaclava. The stars overhead are extraordinary, more stars than you've ever seen, even if you grew up in the country, because there's no light pollution for hundreds of miles in any direction, and the air is so cold and dry that there's virtually no atmospheric distortion. The Milky Way isn't a suggestion up here, it's a river. It pours across the sky from horizon to horizon, and the aurora tonight. It's a faint green curtain low in the north, adds its own otherworldly glow. It would be beautiful if I weren't so focused on not freezing to death. I reach the Stevenson screen, that's the white-painted wooden shelter that houses the thermometers, and open the louvered door with my mitten, which is about as graceful as performing surgery with oven mitts. Inside are the instruments, a standard mercury thermometer, a minimum thermometer, a maximum thermometer, and the psychrometer, that's the wet and dry bulb setup we use to determine humidity and dew point. Reading them requires a flashlight held at exactly the right angle to see the mercury column without parallax error, and it requires me to remove my outer mitten for about 30 seconds to write the readings on the clipboard. 30 seconds. That's all I allow myself. After 30 seconds, my fingers start to stiffen, and after a minute, they're useless. The mercury reads -41 Fahrenheit. I note it. The minimum overnight was -44. The maximum since the last observation was -36. I note these two. The psychrometer is useless tonight. The wet bulb froze solid hours ago, which happens whenever the temperature drops below about -20. There are procedures for dealing with this, involving ice bulb readings and correction tables that some genius at the Weather Bureau devised, but at this temperature, the humidity reading is academic anyway. The air is essentially bone dry. What moisture exists has long since fallen out as ice crystals, those tiny floating diamonds I can see drifting through my flashlight beam. I check the anemometer next. The cups are motionless, zero wind, which confirms what my face already told me. I note the wind direction indicator, which is pointing generally from the north-northwest but meaningless at this velocity. The wind vane has a tendency to freeze in position on calm nights, pointing whichever direction the last breeze nudged it before everything locked up. I record wind calm, visibility. I shine my flashlight toward the known landmarks, the fuel storage drums at 200 yards, the radio antenna at 400. I can see both, barely, so visibility is at least 400 yards, but it's hard to tell beyond that in the darkness. I note visibility 1/2 mile estimated, dark. And here's the thing about all of this. Every reading, every number, every careful notation on this form, it matters. Not just to me, not just to the station. This data goes to Fairbanks, and from Fairbanks it goes into the Continental Weather Forecasting Network, and from there it feeds into predictions that affect airline routes, military operations, shipping lanes, and the daily forecasts that millions of Americans hear on their morning radio. The Arctic is where weather is born. Cold air masses form up here, build strength, and then sweep south across the continent, and if we don't measure them at the source, the forecasters downstream are working blind. That's why I'm standing outside at 5 in the morning at -41 degrees, reading a mercury thermometer by flashlight with fingers I can barely feel. Because somewhere in Chicago, a forecaster needs to know what the air is doing at the top of the world. Those of you who served at remote posts, distant early warning line stations, weather ships, radar installations up north, you understand this particular kind of purpose. The work matters even when nobody's watching. Especially when nobody's watching. If you've got memories of that kind of isolated service, I'd be honored to hear them in the comments. I finish the observation round and head back inside. The whole thing took 12 minutes. 12 minutes outside at -41, and when I step through the door and the warm air hits me, my eyelashes, which have frozen shut twice during the round, begin to thaw, and water runs down my cheeks, and the lenses of my flashlight fog over instantly, and every piece of metal on my person, zipper pulls, clipboard clip, pencil ferrule, develops a coat of condensation that will turn to frost if I don't dry them off immediately. This is the routine. Go out, freeze, come back in, thaw, write it up, do it again in 3 hours. I hang up my parka, peel off the balaclava, which is stiff with frozen breath, and sit down at the desk to transcribe my readings onto the official observation form. The form is a thing of bureaucratic beauty, rows and columns for every conceivable atmospheric measurement, in a format standardized across every Weather Bureau station, from Miami to Point Barrow. I fill in the boxes with the careful block printing they taught us at Chanute. Temperature, -41, dew point, -45 estimated. Pressure, 29.38 inches, corrected to sea level. Wind, calm, clouds, clear, visibility, 1/2 mile, estimated, present weather, ice crystals. Then I encode the observation into the International Synoptic Code, a 5-digit number group system that compresses all of this information into a telegram-like format that can be transmitted by radio in less than a minute. The code is elegant, really, once you learn it. Every weather station on Earth uses the same system, so a meteorologist in Moscow can read my observation from northern Alaska without speaking a word of English. It's one of those quiet international cooperations that nobody talks about, but that actually works. Even at the height of the Cold War, weather data crosses borders freely. The atmosphere doesn't care about politics. Chapter 4. The Radio Room. Sending the observation to Fairbanks. I carry the encoded observation to the radio and warm up the transceiver. It takes about 2 minutes for the tubes to come to temperature, and during those 2 minutes, I put on the headphones and listen to the static. There's something almost comforting about radio static at 5:30 in the morning in the Arctic. It's proof that the outside world still exists, that electromagnetic waves are still bouncing around the ionosphere, that somewhere out there people are talking, transmitting, living their lives in places where the temperature is above zero and coffee doesn't freeze if you leave it on the counter too long. I tune to the assigned frequency and begin transmitting the observation in Morse code. I'm not fast, maybe 15 words a minute, which is workmanlike but nothing to brag about, and the whole transmission takes about 90 seconds. The key has a satisfying mechanical feel under my fingers. Each dit and da, a tiny percussion that I've come to associate with the completion of a task. Observation taken. Observation encoded. Observation transmitted. The data is out of my hands now, traveling at the speed of light across the Arctic darkness toward Fairbanks, where it will join hundreds of other observations from stations across Alaska, Canada, and the Arctic islands. And someone in a warm office will plot them all on a synoptic chart and try to figure out what the weather is going to do next. Fairbanks acknowledges, 3 short dashes, a pause, then the confirmation code. I log the transmission time, 0538 Zulu, and hang up the headphones. That's the rhythm of my days up here. Observe, encode, transmit, wait, confirm, every 3 hours without fail. 0500, 0800, 1100, 1400, 1700, 2000, 2300, and 0200, 8 observations per day, split between the three of us, myself, Hendricks, and Peterson. I take the dawn and morning shifts. Hendricks covers the afternoon and evening. Peterson handles the overnight, which is why he sleeps most of the day and has developed the pallor of a man who hasn't seen sunlight since October. To be fair, none of us have seen sunlight since October. We're at 69 degrees north latitude. The sun went below the horizon in late November and won't show its face again until late January. We're living in what the old Arctic hands call the dark period, weeks of continuous night broken only by a few hours of dim twilight around midday, when the southern horizon glows with a pale, anemic light that's more of a rumor of sun than an actual illumination.
After the transmission, I spend a few minutes updating our wall map. Every station keeps a local synoptic chart, a hand-drawn map of the region with isobars and frontal positions plotted from the observations we receive from neighboring stations. It's not mandatory, strictly speaking, but it helps me understand what's coming. The low-pressure system I noticed on the barograph is now visible on the chart as a tightening cluster of isobars approaching from the northwest. It should reach us sometime tomorrow, bringing wind and probably snow. Wind at -40 is a different animal entirely from wind at -40 in calm conditions. Wind adds the chill factor. At -40 with a 20-mile-per-hour wind, the effective temperature on exposed skin is somewhere around -70. That's the kind of cold that can kill you in minutes, not hours, minutes.
But that's tomorrow's problem. Today is calm, and I'm grateful. Chapter 5, Morning Routine, Maintenance and Station Life. Between observations, the hours belong to maintenance. There is always something that needs fixing, cleaning, calibrating, or simply watching. The station is a collection of machines and instruments in a constant state of negotiation with an environment that wants to destroy them, and keeping everything running is a full-time job for 3 men. This morning my list includes recalibrating the aneroid barometer against the mercury standard, replacing the graph paper on the barograph drum, checking the fuel level in the main storage tank, clearing frost from the exterior instrument shelters, and, if I get to it, attempting to fix the typewriter, which has been jamming on the letter E since last Tuesday. Given that temperature, pressure, and degrees all contain the letter E, this is not a minor inconvenience. I start with the barograph. The paper needs changing every 7 days, and today is the day. I remove the glass case carefully. It's the only spare we have, and if I break it, we're improvising with plastic wrap until the next supply flight and lift the drum off its spindle. The old paper has a week's worth of pressure data traced in a fine blue line that tells the story of every weather system that passed over us. The sharp drop on Tuesday when that blizzard hit, the slow, steady rise through Thursday and Friday as high pressure built in, and now this new gradual decline. I file the paper in the records folder, slide a fresh drum onto the spindle, re-ink the stylus, and set it back in place. It's delicate work, and I take my time with it. These records go to the Weather Bureau archives. 50 years from now, someone might study this data. It needs to be clean. The mercury barometer is next. This is the gold standard, the instrument against which all other pressure measurements are checked. It's a 14 barometer, which means the mercury level in the cistern has to be adjusted to the fiducial point before each reading, and the vernier scale has to be set to the top of the meniscus with a precision that would make a watchmaker proud. I learned to read one of these at training school, and the instructor, a retired Navy meteorologist named Commander Dalton, who'd spent the war forecasting for carrier operations in the Pacific, told us that if we couldn't read a mercury barometer to 1/100th of an inch, we had no business calling ourselves weather observers. Commander Dalton was not a man given to encouragement, but he was right. Precision matters. At this altitude and temperature, the corrections I apply to the raw reading for gravity, for temperature, for altitude can shift the final number by a full 1/10 of an inch, which is the difference between fair weather and storm approaching on a synoptic chart. 7 o'clock. Hendricks is up. I hear him before I see him, the creak of his cot, the thud of boots on plywood, the particular grumbling that is Hendricks's morning language. He appears in the operations room looking like a man who has been personally offended by consciousness. He doesn't say good morning. He never says good morning. He walks to the coffee percolator, pours a cup, drinks half of it standing up, and only then acknowledges my existence with a nod. I've come to appreciate this about Hendricks. No false cheerfulness, no small talk before the first cup. Just an honest acknowledgement that mornings at an Arctic weather station are not something any reasonable person would describe as pleasant. Barometer's dropping, I tell him. He grunts, sips his coffee, looks at the barograph trace.
Grunts again, this time with a slightly different inflection that I've learned to interpret as acknowledgement with mild concern. System coming in from the northwest, I add, probably hit us tomorrow. Wind, he asks. His first word of the day, characteristic. Hendricks doesn't waste vocabulary on anything that isn't essential. Probably. He nods, drinks more coffee. That's the extent of our morning briefing.
Hendricks and I eat breakfast together in what passes for companionable silence. He's reheating canned hash on the stove, corned beef hash, the kind that comes in a flat rectangular tin and slides out in a gelatinous block that you slice and fry until it develops a crust that almost makes you forget what it looked like before cooking, almost. I've already eaten, but I have another cup of coffee and some pilot bread with canned butter, which is slightly rancid but not enough to discard. You develop flexible standards regarding food up here. In the first month I was particular. By the third month I was eating things I would have thrown away back home. By the sixth month, which is where I am now, I've reached a state of culinary acceptance that borders on philosophical. If it's not actually spoiled, it's food. If it's food, you eat it. The station receives supplies once a month, weather permitting, by small aircraft from Fairbanks. Weather permitting is the operative phrase. Last month, the resupply was delayed 11 days because of a storm system that sat over the Brooks Range and refused to move, and by the time the plane finally landed, we were down to canned beans, powdered eggs, and a truly alarming quantity of peanut butter. The pilot, a bush pilot named Gunderson, who seems to regard Arctic flying conditions as a personal challenge rather than a survival concern, brought us mail along with the provisions, and I don't know which we were more grateful for. Probably the mail. You can survive on beans and peanut butter. What you can't survive on is 6 weeks without a letter from home. I have a wife back in Duluth. Her name is Margaret Maggie, and she writes twice a week, letters that take anywhere from 4 days to 3 weeks to reach me depending on the weather and the mail plane schedule. Her last letter arrived with the resupply, and I've read it 4 times already. She tells me about the snow back home, which she finds amusing to report, knowing where I am, and about her sister's new baby, and about the plumbing problem in the kitchen that her father came over to fix, and about how she's been listening to Arthur Godfrey on the radio in the evenings, and it makes the house feel less empty. That last part gets me. I fold the letter carefully and tuck it back into the envelope and put it in my shirt pocket, where it stays all day. I know it's sentimental. I don't care. 8 o'clock brings the first of the day's major tasks, preparing for the balloon launch. Twice a day at 0500 and 1700 Greenwich Mean Time, which translates to about 8 in the morning and 8 in the evening local, we launch a radio sonde. That's a small instrument package carried aloft by a hydrogen-filled weather balloon, and it measures temperature, humidity, and pressure as it rises through the atmosphere, transmitting the data back to us by radio. The upper air observation is arguably more important than the surface observation because it tells the forecasters what's happening in the three-dimensional structure of the atmosphere, where the jet stream is, how thick the cold air mass is, where the temperature inversions sit. Without upper air data, weather forecasting is basically educated guessing. The hydrogen generation is the part of the job I enjoy least. We produce our own hydrogen on site using a chemical generator. Calcium hydride reacted with water produces hydrogen gas, which we pipe into the balloon. The process works fine in theory. In practice, at -40, the water has to be heated first or it freezes in the lines, the valves stick, the rubber hose stiffens to the consistency of a garden hose that's been left out all winter, which, I realize, it essentially has been. And the entire operation requires removing at least one mitten to work the fittings, which means exposing your bare hand to temperatures that cause frostbite in under 2 minutes. I've developed a system. 30 seconds of bare hand work, then back into the mitten for 60 seconds to rewarm, then another 30 seconds. It makes the whole process take twice as long, but I still have all my fingers, which is more than some old Arctic hands can say. I inflate the balloon outside. It's a large latex sphere, about 4 feet in diameter when properly filled, and in the still, cold air, it rises straight up like a slow-motion soap bubble. The radio sonde hangs below it on about 100 feet of nylon cord, a small cardboard box the size of a shoebox, containing a humidity sensor, a temperature element, a pressure switch, and a radio transmitter running on a small battery that I've been keeping warm inside the station until the last possible moment. Cold kills batteries. It's one of the fundamental truths of Arctic life. Any battery left exposed at -40 will be dead within an hour. I keep spare batteries for the flashlight, the radio sonde, and the emergency radio all stored near the stove, rotating them like a baker rotates loaves. I release the balloon, and it rises silently into the darkness. Within seconds, the flashlight can't reach it anymore, and it's just gone. Swallowed by the Arctic night, climbing at about 1,000 feet per minute through air that's getting even colder as it ascends. The radio sonde will transmit for about an hour, reaching altitudes of 60 to 80,000 feet before the balloon expands beyond its elastic limit and bursts, sending the instrument package tumbling back to the tundra on a small parachute. Nobody recovers them. They're out there by the hundreds, scattered across the Arctic wilderness, little cardboard boxes with their guts of wire and foil, slowly being buried by snow and forgotten. Somewhere out on the tundra there are radio sondes from every year since this station was established in 1948, all slowly decomposing back into the landscape, the world's most useless archaeological record. Back inside, I track the radio sonde on the receiver. The signal comes in as a series of audio tones, each frequency corresponding to a specific measurement, and I decode them against a calibration chart unique to each radio sonde unit. Temperature at 5,000 feet, -46, at 10,000 feet, -52, at 15,000, -58. The Arctic atmosphere in winter is like a layer cake of cold, each layer colder than the last until you hit the tropopause, that invisible boundary where the stratosphere begins and temperatures stop falling. Finding the tropopause is one of the most important parts of the sounding, because its height tells you a great deal about the overall state of the atmosphere. Tonight it's at about 32,000 feet, which is typical for this latitude in January. I plot the data on a special graph called a Stuva diagram, temperature on one axis, pressure on the other, with lines of constant humidity and potential temperature woven through it like a spiderweb. To an untrained eye, it looks like abstract art. To a meteorologist, it's a portrait of the atmosphere, and you can read it like a book. I can see the stable inversion layer at 3,000 feet. That's the cap that's been keeping the surface cold locked in. And I can see a slight wind shift at 15,000 feet that suggests the approaching low-pressure system is beginning to tilt the upper air pattern. Tomorrow is going to be interesting, and by interesting, I mean unpleasant. Chapter 6. Mid-morning. The fuel run and station chores. 9:30. The radio sonde tracking is complete, the data encoded and ready for the next transmission window, and now it's time for the chore I've been putting off. The fuel run. The station burns coal for the main stoves and diesel for the backup generator, and both need regular attention. The coal comes from a supply shed 50 yards from the main building, 50 yards that feel like 500 when you're hauling a bucket of coal at -35. The diesel fuel is stored in 55-gallon drums on a pallet beside the generator shed, and every few days I transfer fuel into a smaller can and carry it to the generator. The diesel has a peculiar quality at extreme cold. It thickens, not quite freezes. Diesel has antifreeze additives for Arctic use, but becomes sluggish and reluctant, pouring like cold honey rather than the free-flowing liquid it is at normal temperatures. The hand pump works slowly, and by the time I've transferred 5 gallons, my arms ache and my fingers are numb despite the mittens. I carry the fuel can back to the generator shed, top off the tank, check the engine oil, which is also thickened naturally, and verify that the generator is running. It provides our electricity, lights, radio, and the radio sonde receiver. If the generator fails, we switch to batteries and the hand-cranked emergency transmitter, which works but which I pray I never have to use, because cranking a transmitter by hand for 20 minutes in the cold is approximately my definition of a bad day. The coal shed is my least favorite place on the station. It's unheated naturally, and the coal pile sits on a concrete pad that radiates cold like an open freezer. Shoveling coal into the bucket requires removing the outer mittens for grip, and coal dust gets into everything: your clothes, your nostrils, the creases of your skin. I fill 2 buckets, one for the operations room stove and one for the sleeping quarters, and carry them back to the main building. Each bucket weighs about 30 pounds, and by the time I've made the trip, my shoulders are burning and my lungs ache from the cold air. Those of you who heated with coal, and plenty of homes still did in the 40s and 50s, know the particular relationship you develop with the stuff. It's dirty, it's heavy, it's constant work, but when it's burning right, there's nothing warmer, nothing more honest. I feed the stoves, adjust the dampers, and sweep up the coal dust from the floor. The dust is inevitable. It settles on the logbooks, on the instruments, on the radio, on our food. Peterson once found coal dust in a sealed can of peaches, which none of us could explain, and all of us found deeply unsettling.
My theory is that the coal dust has achieved sentience and is slowly colonizing the station. Hendricks thinks it gets in through the ventilation. Peterson, who has a philosophical streak that surfaces around 2 in the morning during his shift, believes the coal dust is simply asserting its natural dominance over a universe that was, after all, largely composed of carbon to begin with. We've discussed this at length. There isn't much else to discuss.
I attempt the typewriter repair. The Underwood has been a reliable machine for most of its tour of duty at this station. It's a Model S, built sometime in the late 1940s, and it has the solid mechanical feel of American manufacturing at its best. But the E key has developed a hesitation. It sticks at the top of its stroke, requiring a firm second press to complete the strike, which means every E in my typed reports is either missing or doubled, neither of which is acceptable for official Weather Bureau correspondence. I remove the cover, blow out the coal dust, there it is again, and examine the linkage. The problem appears to be a slight bend in the type bar, probably from the cold cycling. Metal contracts in extreme cold and expands when the stove heats the room, and over months this thermal cycling can deform delicate components. I straighten the bar as best I can with a pair of pliers, replace the cover, and type a test line. The temperature at 0800 hours was negative 39 degrees Fahrenheit. Every E strikes cleanly. Congratulations, I'm now a meteorologist and a typewriter mechanic. The Arctic makes generalists of us all. Chapter 7. The 11 o'clock observation. Twilight at midday. Around 11, the twilight arrives. I use the word loosely. The sun isn't actually up. It won't clear the horizon for another 2 weeks, but for about an hour and a half, the southern sky brightens to a pale glow that's somewhere between late dusk and early dawn. It's enough light to see the instrument shelters without a flashlight. It's enough light to make out the horizon and the shape of the hills to the south, and the vast flat white emptiness of the frozen tundra stretching away in every direction. It is not enough light to read by, it is not enough light to call daylight. But after weeks of 24-hour darkness, it is profoundly, achingly welcome. I step outside for the 11 o'clock observation and stand for a moment just looking south. I do this every day during the twilight. It's become a ritual. The glow is soft and warm-colored, amber and pink and pale gold, and it sits on the horizon like a promise. The sun is down there somewhere, just below the curve of the earth, sending its light up through the atmosphere in this indirect, refracted wash that's more feeling than illumination. I think about Maggie. She's probably just finishing breakfast, looking out the kitchen window at the snow in the yard, listening to the morning news. She's in sunlight, actual, honest-to-God sunlight, even if it's weak January sun in Minnesota. The thought of it is almost too much. I turn back to the instruments. The readings are slightly warmer than the dawn observation, negative 36, up 5 degrees from the overnight low, which makes sense given the minimal solar input from the twilight. The barometer has continued its decline, 29.31 and falling more quickly now. I record it all with the practiced efficiency of someone who has done this roughly 700 times since arriving at this station. Hand out of the mitten, pencil on the clipboard, numbers in the boxes, hand back in the mitten, 30 seconds. The whole observation takes 9 minutes today, fast, because there are no clouds to classify and the visibility has improved with the twilight to an estimated 2 miles. Back inside, I encode and transmit. Fairbanks acknowledges I log the transmission and pour myself another cup of coffee, my 4th of the day, which is below average. Coffee consumption at an Arctic weather station follows its own mathematical laws. It increases linearly with decreasing temperature and exponentially with increasing boredom. By my calculations, if we were stationed at absolute zero, we'd need approximately 40 gallons per day. Hendricks is reading at the table. He's been working through a stack of paperback westerns that someone left at the station years ago, Zane Grey, Max Brand, Louis L'Amour, and he reads with the slow, careful attention of a man who knows that when he finishes the last book, there won't be another until the next resupply. He's rationing his entertainment the way we ration fuel and food. 1 chapter per sitting, no skipping ahead. I respect the discipline, even as I privately find westerns about as interesting as watching paint dry. My own reading material is a battered copy of Moby Dick that I've been working through since November, and I'm beginning to understand why Melville devoted entire chapters to the classification of whales. When you live in a world reduced to a few hundred square feet and a handful of companions, even the most obscure details become absorbing. You have time to care about the difference between a right whale and a sperm whale. You have time to care about everything.
The morning passes. Time at an Arctic station doesn't flow, it accumulates. Minutes stack on minutes like snow layers, each one indistinguishable from the last, and you develop an awareness of time's passage that borders on physical sensation. You feel the hours. Not because anything happens in them, very little happens, but because the emptiness of each hour has its own weight and texture. This isn't boredom exactly, though it resembles boredom. It's something deeper. It's the experience of being a conscious being in a place where consciousness has almost nothing to work with. No external stimulation, no variety, no news except what comes through the radio, no faces except Hendricks and Peterson, no landscape except white and dark. Your mind turns inward, and what it finds there can be interesting or terrible depending on the day.
I've scraped a porthole in the frost on the operations room window, and through it I watch the twilight fade. It's noon. The glow is retreating southward, pulling back toward the horizon like a tide going out, and within an hour the darkness will return. 23 hours of night, 1 hour of twilight. That's January at 69 North. You'd think you'd get used to it, and in some mechanical sense you do. Your body adjusts its sleep rhythms more or less, and you stop expecting daylight because there isn't any to expect. But something in you, something old and animal, never stops wanting the sun. It's a hunger you can't feed. A homesickness for light itself. Chapter 8. Midday Meal. Spam, Stories, and the Weight of Silence. Noon is the closest thing we have to a communal event. Peterson is up. He emerged from the sleeping quarters about 20 minutes ago, blinking like a man surfacing from a deep cave, which in a sense he is. Peterson is the youngest of us, 24. From a small town in Iowa, and he has the particular combination of earnest competence and quiet strangeness that 6 months of overnight shifts in the Arctic produces. He's a good observer, meticulous, careful, thorough in his readings, but he's developed habits. He talks to the instruments, not in a concerning way, more in the way a farmer might talk to livestock. "Come on now," he'll murmur to the barograph when the stylus skips. "Easy. Easy, Hendricks, and I have decided this is perfectly normal behavior under the circumstances, and have chosen not to examine it further." The midday meal is the biggest of the day, and today it's beef stew, reheated from a military surplus ration tin that claims to contain beef stew canned meat and vegetables, and delivers on this promise in the most technically accurate and least appetizing way possible. The beef is gray. The vegetables are soft. The gravy has a texture that defies description, but sits somewhere between paste and disappointment. But it's hot. It's caloric. And when you pour it over a slab of canned brown bread, Boston brown bread, the kind that comes in a cylindrical tin and slices into perfect rounds, it becomes something approaching a meal. Peterson has also opened a tin of peaches, and the peaches are, as always, the highlight. Sweet, bright, absolutely unchanged by their journey from some California canning facility to the top of the world. Those peaches taste like summer. They taste like somewhere else. We eat together and talk. Talking is important, not because we have anything particularly important to say, we don't, but because the act of conversation is a maintenance task as essential as feeding the stove or checking the barometer. 3 men living in close quarters in complete isolation have to talk or they'll go slowly sideways. I've read about Antarctic expeditions where men stopped speaking to each other and the results were catastrophic. Paranoia, suspicion, hostility that built from nothing and consumed everything. We're careful about this. We talk about home, we talk about food, specifically the food we'll eat when we get back to civilization, which has become a form of collaborative fantasy that would rival any fiction writer. Hendricks has described in exquisite detail the steak dinner he intends to order at a restaurant in Fairbanks when his rotation ends. He's been refining this description for weeks. The steak is now so precisely specified 2 inches thick, medium rare, bone-in ribeye with a char crust that it has become almost a sacred text. We play cribbage. Hendricks and I have played roughly 300 games since I arrived, and the running score is close enough that either of us could claim a statistical advantage depending on how you count the disputed game from November, where the cards got stuck together from spilled coffee, and we couldn't agree on a re-deal. Peterson doesn't play. He prefers to sit with his coffee and stare at the wall in what he calls thinking, and what Hendricks calls practicing for a career in competitive wall staring. The truth is, Peterson is composing letters in his head. He writes them down later,
Long detailed letters to his mother and his girlfriend and his college roommate, filling page after page in a neat small hand. He writes more than either of us. I think it's how he processes the isolation, by converting the experience into words and sending those words south, as if by describing this place thoroughly enough, he can make it more bearable.
Peterson is writing. Hendricks is reading. I'm on my 5th cup of coffee and thinking about the barometer, which has dropped another 0.02 in the last hour. The system is accelerating. I make a mental note to check the emergency supplies before the storm arrives. Extra batteries, the backup lantern, canned food in case we can't reach the storage shed. Storms at this latitude can last days. The worst one since I arrived, back in November, pinned us inside for 4 straight days with winds gusting to 60 miles an hour and visibility measured in feet. The station shook. I don't mean it creaked or rattled, it shook. The whole building flexed on its pilings like a living thing, and the wind noise was constant, this deep bass howl that went on hour after hour until it stopped being sound and became simply the texture of existence. We kept our observation schedule even during that storm, which meant going outside into a 60-mile-per-hour wind at -30, and I can tell you that those were the longest 12-minute observation rounds of my life. Those of you who weathered storms in Korea, or on the North Atlantic, or in remote posts anywhere, you know this feeling. You know the moment when you realize the weather is bigger than anything you've built, and all you can do is hunker down and wait it out. If you've got stories about riding out storms in places that had no business being occupied by humans, I'd be genuinely interested to hear them in the comments. Chapter 9. Early Afternoon. The Instrument Check and Ice Crystals. The afternoon shift begins with an instrument check. Every day between the 1400 and 1700 observations, I go through every recording instrument on the station and verify it against its reference standard. The thermograph, a drum recorder, similar to the barograph but measuring temperature, gets checked against the mercury thermometer. The hygrograph, which records humidity using a bundle of human hairs that expand and contract with moisture levels, gets checked against the psychrometer when it's not frozen and against tables when it is. The aneroid barometer gets compared to the mercury standard. These comparisons are logged in a separate calibration record, and any drift beyond the acceptable tolerance gets corrected. The hygrograph is a marvel of elegant simplicity, or, depending on your perspective, an absurd contraption that has no business working as well as it does. Human hair expands when it absorbs moisture and contracts when it dries out, and this property is so reliable and so consistent that you can build a precise humidity measuring instrument around a bundle of hairs stretched across a frame. I find this deeply satisfying. Somewhere out there, a barber swept up hair from a shop floor, and that hair ended up in a weather instrument in the Arctic, still faithfully responding to moisture changes, still doing useful work. There's a lesson in there about finding purpose in unexpected places, but I'll leave the philosophy to Peterson. 2 o'clock. Time to clear the instrument shelters. Frost and rime ice build up on the Stevenson screens constantly, and if you don't clear them, the louvered sides stop allowing free airflow, which compromises the thermometer readings. I take a stiff brush outside and work my way along the screens, knocking ice off the louvers with firm strokes. The ice falls in sheets and chunks, tinkling on the packed snow like wind chimes. It's oddly satisfying work, simple, physical, with immediately visible results. Brush, scrape, knock, the clean white louvers appear beneath the ice like something being excavated. While I'm outside, I notice the ice crystals. They're always there on calm, cold nights. Tiny hexagonal plates of ice forming directly in the air and drifting slowly downward like the world's smallest, most patient snowfall. The meteorological term is ice crystals or diamond dust, and it happens when the air is so cold and so saturated even at very low humidity levels that water vapor sublimates directly into ice without ever becoming liquid. You can see them in a flashlight beam, thousands of them, millions, each one a perfect tiny crystal catching the light and flashing. It's one of the most beautiful phenomena I've ever witnessed, and it happens here almost every night in winter. You learn to look for it. You learn to stand still and just watch, even when it's -30 and your face hurts, because there are some things that justify the discomfort of paying attention. The wind is picking up. Not much. I estimate 5 to 8 miles per hour, barely enough to move the anemometer cups. But it's a change from the dead calm we've had for 2 days, and it confirms what the barometer has been telling me. The system is coming.
The wind vane has swung to the northwest, which is consistent with the approach of a low-pressure center from that direction. By tomorrow this time, those cups will be spinning. By tomorrow evening, we'll be in the thick of it. I make a mental note to double-check the tie-downs on the fuel drum pallet and secure anything loose around the station exterior before dark, which I realize with a grim sort of amusement is right now. It's always dark. The concept of before dark has lost all meaning up here. Chapter 10. The 1400 Observation and Storm Preparation. The 1400 observation follows the same sequence. Gear up, go out, read the instruments, come back, transcribe, encode, transmit. Each observation is identical in structure and yet subtly different in content because the atmosphere is never still. It's always changing, always shifting, always doing something that the numbers capture in their quiet, precise way. This observation shows the wind has increased to 10 miles per hour from the northwest. The temperature has dropped a degree to -35, and the barometer is at 29.24 inches and falling steadily. I've added a remark to the observation, increasing cloud from northwest alto stratus. The clouds are the first visible sign of the approaching system. I can't see them directly, it's dark, but I can see that the stars in the northwestern sky have begun to disappear, swallowed by an advancing sheet of cloud that's creeping across the sky like a slow curtain being drawn. I stand outside for a moment after finishing the readings and watch the clouds advance. There's something deeply satisfying about seeing a weather system arrive when you've already predicted it from the barograph trace. It's confirmation that the instruments work, that the data means what you think it means, that this entire enterprise of measuring the atmosphere is not futile. The cloud sheet is moving fast at altitude, probably 60-70 miles per hour, up at the alto stratus level. Though at the surface the wind is still manageable. That will change. The surface wind always lags the upper-level flow when a system approaches. The wind at the surface is going to accelerate through tonight and into tomorrow, and by this time tomorrow we'll be dealing with something significant. I spend the next hour on storm preparation. The fuel drums are already lashed to their pallet, but I check each strap and add a second tie-down to the upwind side. An empty 55-gallon drum caught by a 60-mile-per-hour wind becomes a projectile. Even a full drum can shift if the snow builds up on one side and the wind catches the differential. I check the guide ropes between buildings. These are our lifelines during blizzard conditions, the only thing that keeps you from walking 10 steps from the door and becoming irretrievably lost in a whiteout. I've heard stories from other stations. A man at a station on the north slope stepped outside during a storm without holding the guide rope, walked 12 feet, lost orientation, and was found frozen the next morning 70 yards from the building. He'd walked in circles, in a whiteout, with no visible reference point and the wind howling from every direction. Your internal compass is worthless. The guide rope is everything. I test every knot, every splice, every stake. I add a second line to the stretch between the main building and the generator shed, because that's the most exposed crossing and the one most likely to be buried under a snowdrift. I secure the door to the hydrogen shed with an extra latch. I bring in an extra bucket of coal and top off the water container from the snowmelt tank, because during a storm the tank can freeze if the heating element fails, and melting snow on the stove is a slow, tedious process that produces remarkably little water for the effort involved. Back inside, I inventory the emergency supplies. Batteries, 12 D cells, 4 C cells, all warm and recently tested. Kerosene lantern, full, wick trimmed. Matches, 3 boxes, dry. First aid kit, stocked. Emergency radio, operational, hand crank charged. Canned food accessible without leaving the main building. 7 days worth for 3 men, assuming we're not eating lavishly. Given what we've been eating normally, we wouldn't notice the difference. The wind is audible now, a low, soft moan around the building corners that's more felt than heard. It's the prelude. The symphony starts tomorrow. 4 o'clock. Shift change. Hendricks takes over the radio and the observation duties for the evening, and I brief him on the approaching system. I show him the barograph trace, the updated map, the upper air sounding from this morning. He listens with the careful attention of a man who takes his work seriously, which he does. Whatever else you might say about Hendricks, and there isn't much to say because he doesn't give you much to work with, he is a first-rate weather observer. His readings are precise, his encoding is clean, and his log entries are models of concise, factual reporting. The Army trained him well before he transferred to the Weather Bureau, and the Army's influence shows in everything he does. Storm might hit late tonight, I tell him.
More likely tomorrow morning. Winds could be significant. He nods, looks at the barograph. 30 knots, at least. Maybe gusting higher. It's a deep low. He nods again, adjusts his headphones. I'll keep an eye on it. That's the most extensive conversation about weather Hendricks and I have ever had, and it contains everything either of us needs to know.
Chapter 11. Late afternoon. Downtime and the weight of isolation. My official duties are done for the day. Hendricks has the watch until midnight, when Peterson takes over for the graveyard shift. I should sleep. My alarm goes off at 4 again tomorrow. But it's only 4:30, and despite 6 months of Arctic darkness, my body still can't adjust to sleeping at 5 in the afternoon. So I read Melville, Chapter 42, The Whiteness of the Whale. Ishmael is trying to explain why the color white, which should symbolize purity and innocence, fills him with dread. He writes about white landscapes, Arctic landscapes, actually, and the horror of infinite whiteness. I look up from the book and out the frosted window and think, well, he wasn't wrong. The white out there isn't innocent, it isn't pure, it's indifferent, which is worse than malevolent, because at least malevolence implies that someone notices you. The isolation is the hardest part. Not the cold, not the food, not the darkness. The isolation. There are 3 of us at this station, and we get along well enough. No major conflicts, no personality clashes bad enough to disrupt operations, but 3 men is not a community. It's a skeleton crew. You can't have a conversation with Hendricks that lasts more than 6 exchanges. You can't have a conversation with Peterson that lasts fewer than 60, because Peterson, once started, has a tendency to follow a thought wherever it leads, including into philosophical territory that would make a seminary professor blink. The result is that most of the time you're alone with your own thoughts, and your own thoughts after 6 months have been pretty thoroughly explored. I miss Maggie. I miss her in specific, concrete ways that surprise me with their precision. I miss the sound of her humming while she cooks. She hums off-key, always the same 3 songs, and she doesn't know she's doing it. I miss the way she reads the newspaper aloud, editorializing as she goes. I miss the weight of her head on my shoulder during evening radio programs. I miss the smell of the shampoo she uses, something floral, lily of the valley maybe, that I'd catch when she walked past. These aren't grand romantic longings. They're small, domestic, ordinary. And they're the ones that cut deepest, because they remind me that ordinary life is the most valuable thing there is. And I gave it up for a year to stand in the cold and read thermometers. I cross off another day on the calendar. 183 down, 182 to go. The calendar is the most important object in this room. More important than the heater, more important than the photograph of Maggie, because the calendar is the physical proof that time is passing, that each day brings me 1 day closer to leaving. Without it, the days would blur together into an undifferentiated mass of cold and dark and routine, and I think that would be genuinely dangerous. The calendar gives shape to shapelessness. It turns endurance into arithmetic. And arithmetic, unlike willpower, is reliable. 182 is less than 183. That's not a feeling. That's a fact. And some days, facts are all you've got. 6 o'clock. I wash my face in the basin. The water comes from our snow melt system, a tank on the roof that catches snow, which melts gradually from the building's heat and gravity feeds into the interior plumbing. In theory, in practice, the system freezes regularly and requires manual intervention, which is a euphemism for Peterson climbs onto the roof with a blowtorch and curses until the ice plug clears. Today, the water is running, lukewarm and slightly metallic tasting from the tank, and I splash it on my face and look at myself in the mirror. I don't look great. 6 months of limited sunlight has given me the complexion of a man who works in a coal mine, which, given the coal dust situation, isn't entirely inaccurate. My eyes have that slightly hollow look that I've noticed in all long-term Arctic personnel, a weariness that doesn't come from lack of sleep, but from lack of variety. The same walls, the same faces, the same view of nothing. It accumulates behind the eyes. Dinner is my responsibility tonight. We rotate cooking duties, and I use the word cooking with full awareness that it's generous. I open 2 cans of chicken noodle soup, add extra water to stretch it, heat it on the stove, and serve it with pilot bread and canned butter. For dessert, and again, the word does heavy lifting, there's canned fruit cocktail. The fruit cocktail is the one provision that all 3 of us agree is genuinely good. The tiny cubes of peach, pear, and grape in heavy syrup taste exactly the same here as they would in a kitchen in Minneapolis or Des Moines or anywhere else, and there's something comforting about that. Some things don't change with latitude. After dinner,
Peterson and I play cribbage while Hendricks monitors the radio and prepares for the 1700 transmission. Peterson is a better player than I expected. He has a mathematician's instinct for counting combinations and a gambler's willingness to take risks on the cut, and he beats me 2 games out of 3 tonight, which puts him up for the week. I'd mind more if the stakes were anything other than bragging rights. We've discussed playing for money, but decided against it, not out of moral conviction, but because there's literally nothing to spend money on at the station, and the psychological dynamic of owing someone money when you're trapped with them for months seemed inadvisable. The wind is building. I can hear it now even from inside, a steady hum that rises occasionally to a moan when a gust hits the building broadside. The building creaks. Not dramatically. This station was built to withstand Arctic conditions and has done so for 6 years, but the pilings flex and the joints between wall panels shift slightly, and you can feel it in the floor. A faint vibration that tells you the wind is pushing harder than the calm surface noise suggests. Hendricks looks up from the radio and catches my eye. We both know what's coming. He nods slightly. I nod back. No words necessary. Chapter 12. Evening. The world shrinks to 4 walls. Hendricks finishes the 1700 transmission and pulls the headphones down around his neck. The signal was rough tonight. The static has been building all afternoon as the ionosphere responds to whatever magnetic disturbance the approaching storm is dragging with it. Arctic radio communication is never reliable. The ionosphere up here is thin, volatile, and subject to disruptions from solar activity and geomagnetic storms that can wipe out high-frequency communications for hours or even days. During the November blizzard, we lost radio contact with Fairbanks for 36 hours. And those 36 hours were the loneliest I've felt since arriving. Not because we were in danger, we had supplies, fuel, and shelter, but because the radio is our only connection to the rest of humanity. And when it goes silent, the isolation becomes absolute. Barometer's falling faster, Hendricks says. It's one of the longest unsolicited statements he's made this week, which tells me he's paying close attention. I walk over to the barograph and he's right. The trace has steepened noticeably in the last 2 hours. We're down to 29.14 inches. That's a significant drop. The system is deepening as it approaches, which means the pressure gradient is tightening, which means the wind is going to be worse than I initially estimated. I revise my mental forecast upward. Sustained winds of 35 to 45 miles per hour, gusts possibly to 60, at -30 or colder. The wind chill will be somewhere in the range of -70 to -80. Could be a big one, I say. Hendricks looks at the barograph, looks at me. Yep, eloquence is not his gift. 8 o'clock, the evening balloon launch. Hendricks handles this one. I watch from the doorway as he suits up. Parka, balaclava, mittens, goggles, moving with the deliberate efficiency of a man who's done this hundreds of times and has no interest in spending 1 second longer outside than necessary. He takes the radio sonde, the inflated balloon, and the flashlight and steps out into the wind. From the doorway, I can see Hendricks fighting the balloon. In calm conditions, the launch takes about a minute. Hold, release, watch it rise. In wind, it becomes a wrestling match. The balloon catches the gust and yanks sideways, straining the cord, pulling Hendricks' arms up and to the right. He leans into it, waits for a lull, and releases. The balloon shoots upward and immediately begins drifting southeast at a steep angle, disappearing into the blowing snow within seconds. Whether the radio sonde will function long enough to provide useful data in these conditions is an open question. The wind at altitude will carry it east at tremendous speed, and the transmitter will be fighting the same ionospheric disruption that's degrading our ground radio. But you launch anyway. That's the job. You launch regardless of conditions, regardless of whether you think the data will be useful, because the one time you don't launch is the one time the data would have mattered. Hendricks comes back in looking like a man who has been in a fight with the weather and called it a draw. Snow coats his parka in a thick rime, his goggles are fogged opaque, and his balaclava has frozen to his chin where the condensation from his breathing has turned to ice. He pulls the balaclava off with a grunt that qualifies as the most emotional expression I've seen from him all week. "Wind's up," he says. "How bad?" 25 steady, gusting harder. He stamps snow off his boots. Balloon went sideways like a bat out of. Well, it went sideways. Signal, he shakes his head. Marginal, we'll see. The radio sonde tracking is difficult. The signal fades in and out as the wind carries the balloon through pockets of ionospheric interference, and Hendricks has to keep adjusting the tuning dial to stay locked on the frequency. He gets useful data up to about 20,000 feet, then loses the signal entirely. He tries for another 10 minutes, coaxing the receiver, nudging the dial fraction by fraction, but it's gone. He notes the cutoff altitude in the log, encodes what he has, and transmits it to Fairbanks with a remark about signal loss due to conditions. It's frustrating. A partial sounding is better than nothing, but it leaves a gap in the upper air record that the forecasters will have to fill with guesswork or data from neighboring stations. I'm off duty, I should be sleeping. But the wind is too loud for sleep, and there's a nervous energy in the station that comes with an approaching storm, a tightness, a heightened awareness that makes rest impossible. The body knows. It doesn't matter that you're inside, that the walls are solid, that the stove is burning. Something in you registers the wind and the falling pressure and the building vibration and says, stay awake, stay alert. Something is coming.
9 o'clock. All three of us are in the operations room, which only happens when conditions outside are bad enough to make the sleeping quarters feel too far away from the action. Nobody has said this out loud. We've simply gravitated to the same room, drawn by the same instinct that makes animals group together before a storm. Peterson is writing. Hendricks is monitoring. I'm standing by the stove, drinking coffee I don't need, listening to the wind. The wind has a vocabulary, if you pay attention. There's the bass note, that steady, low roar of sustained airflow across flat terrain, a sound so constant that your brain eventually files it as background noise. Then there are the gusts, sudden crescendos that hit the building broadside with a physical thump, rattling the walls and making the stovepipe ring like a tuning fork. And within the gusts there are harmonics, higher-pitched whistles where the air finds gaps between panels, around window frames, through the ventilation ports. And beneath it all, felt more than heard, is the vibration in the floor as the pilings absorb and transmit the wind's force into the building's structure.
It's not frightening exactly. Not anymore. The first storm was frightening. I won't pretend otherwise. The first time this building shook hard enough to knock a logbook off the desk, my heart rate went to about 120 and stayed there for an hour. But you adapt, you learn what the building can take. You learn the sounds that mean normal storm and the sounds that mean check the door seals. You learn to sleep through sustained 40-mile-per-hour winds eventually, and to wake up when something changes. The human capacity for adaptation is genuinely remarkable. Given enough time, you can normalize almost anything. Whether that's a strength or a flaw is something I've been thinking about lately. Even the door is leaking. Fine powder snow, driven by the wind at 25+ miles per hour, finds its way through every imperfection in the door seal. It sifts in like flour through a sieve, building a tiny drift on the floor that I sweep up every hour or so. You can't stop it. You can stuff rags in the gaps. You can adjust the weather stripping. You can press your body against the door and will it to be tighter. The snow gets in anyway. At this station we have a saying, borrowed from some earlier occupant who scratched it into the plywood above the door frame. The wind always wins. It's the closest thing we have to a philosophy. Chapter 13. Night Watch, Keeping the Instruments Alive. 10 o'clock. The storm is here in earnest now. The wind has reached sustained 30 with gusts touching 40, and the station is fully in the grip of it. The sound is immense, a wall of noise that presses on your ears and fills every space in the building. The gusts hit like body blows, and the building responds with groans and creaks that would be alarming if you didn't know the structure. I trust this building. It's survived worse than this, but trust and comfort are not the same thing, and I am not comfortable. Hendricks is logging storm observations every 30 minutes instead of the standard 3-hour interval, a protocol we follow whenever conditions exceed certain thresholds. The extra observations give the forecasters a finer-grained picture of the storm's passage and help them track how the system is evolving. It also means Hendricks is making twice as many trips outside, which he accepts without complaint because that's who Hendricks is. He suits up, goes out, takes his readings, comes back, strips off the snow-caked gear, and sits down to encode and transmit with the mechanical discipline of a man who has decided that weather will not defeat him. I watch him go out for the 22:30 observation, and the wind nearly takes the door out of my hands. Snow drives into the entryway in a horizontal blast, coating the floor, the walls, my face. I can see Hendricks for about 3 seconds, a dark shape moving along the guide rope, and then the blowing snow closes around him, and he's gone. Just gone. Swallowed by the white. Visibility is down to maybe 50 feet, maybe less.
The instrument shelters are 100 yards away. He'll be out there for 15 minutes at least, navigating by rope and touch, reading instruments by flashlight in conditions that would make most people curl up in a ball and weep. I stand at the door and wait. This is what we do. When one man goes out in a storm, another watches the door. If the man outside doesn't return within 20 minutes, the watcher goes out on the guide rope to find him. If both men fail to return, the third man calls Fairbanks and reports an emergency. It's never come to that. Not at this station.
Not yet. 14 minutes. 15. The door opens. Hendricks stumbles in on a blast of wind and snow, slams the door, and leans against it for a moment, breathing hard. His face, what I can see of it around the balaclava and goggles, is rimmed with frost. He pulls the goggles off and his eyes are bloodshot from the wind-driven snow. Visibility's gone, he says. I had to feel for the Stevenson screen. Couldn't see it from 3 feet. Readings. He holds up the clipboard. The paper is wet, the writing smeared but legible. -31. Wind estimated 40, gusting 50. Visibility near 0. Gusting 50. That puts the wind chill around -80. At those temperatures, exposed skin doesn't just get frostbitten, it freezes. Literally, the moisture in your skin crystallizes in seconds. You lose feeling immediately. The damage is happening before you know it. Nice night, Hendricks says. First time I've heard him use anything approaching humor. The storm must be getting to him. I try to rest on 2 chairs pushed together near the stove. It's not sleep, and I don't pretend it is. It's that state between waking and sleeping, where your body goes heavy, but your mind stays tethered to the room, to the wind, to the building's responses, to Hendricks's occasional movements at the desk. The stove throws good heat, and I'm warm, genuinely warm, for maybe the first time all day. Warmth is a luxury I've learned to appreciate with the deep gratitude of someone who knows exactly what cold feels like. Before this assignment, warmth was invisible to me, like breathing, like gravity, something that simply was. Now I notice it. I notice the exact moment when the heat from the stove reaches my feet. I notice the difference between 62 degrees and 64 degrees. I notice when the coal is burning well and when it needs attention, because the quality of warmth changes, not just the temperature, but the feeling of it, the steadiness, the depth. Those of you who grew up with coal heat or wood stoves understand this. The way heat from a real fire is different from heat from a radiator or a forced air system. It has character. It has direction. You feel it on the side of your body facing the stove, and the other side stays cool, and there's something honest about that. Something direct, physical, real. Modern heating is democratic. It fills a room evenly and asks nothing from you. A coal stove demands attention, demands fuel, demands respect, and in return it gives you heat that you've earned. I sound like an old man, and I'm 27. This place is aging me in ways that won't show up in a mirror. Just before midnight, Peterson appears. He looks like he always looks after sleeping through the day, slightly confused about which direction time is flowing, with his blonde hair pressed flat on one side and sticking straight up on the other. But he has coffee, which means his priorities are in order, and within 5 minutes he's at the desk, headphones on, reviewing the logbook entries from the evening. Hendricks briefs him in his characteristically concise fashion. Storm, wind 40, gusting 50. Pressure still dropping, radio's intermittent. Your problem now. Peterson nods, sips his coffee, and settles in. Hendricks heads for bed. I should do the same. My alarm goes off in 4 hours, and the storm will still be here when it does. I walk to the sleeping quarters through a corridor that shakes. The fluorescent tube flickers as the generator surges, wind load on the power lines probably, and for a half second the corridor goes dark and then light again. I don't flinch. 6 months ago I would have flinched. Now I just note it. Generator surged. Likely wind on the external wiring. Should check the connections tomorrow if conditions allow. The brain converts anxiety into technical assessment. That's adaptation. That's survival. That's the Arctic rewriting the software of your nervous system until fear becomes data. I sit on my cot and pull off my boots. My feet ache. That dull, persistent ache that comes from hours of standing and walking on cold, hard surfaces in heavy boots. I flex my toes and feel the joints pop. Hendricks is already asleep. Already. The man has a gift. I pull the blanket over me and lie on my back, staring at the plywood ceiling, listening to the wind. Chapter 14. Midnight. The storm and the ceiling. The ceiling is plywood. I know every knot, every seam, every nail head. I've mapped this ceiling the way a prisoner maps the walls of a cell, not from desperation, exactly, but from the sheer accumulation of hours spent looking at it. There's a knot above my left shoulder that looks like a face in profile. There's a seam near the light fixture that's opening slightly. I should caulk that before it becomes a draft. There's a nail near the far wall that's working its way out, pushed by the thermal cycling, and every few weeks I hammer it back in with the heel of my boot. The ceiling tells a story of contraction and expansion, of wood resisting and yielding, of a building that breathes with the temperature. The wind gusts hit in a rhythm now, 3 to 4 seconds of the sustained roar, then a deeper surge that builds like an inhalation and peaks with a thump against the windward wall. The cot rocks. Not much. Maybe a 1/4 inch of lateral movement, but enough to feel. You wouldn't call it swaying, you'd call it breathing. The building is breathing with the wind, flexing and releasing, absorbing and returning energy, and if you let yourself, you can sync your own breathing to it. Inhale with the gust, exhale with the lull. In, out, the building, and you, breathing together in the dark. I think about time, not clock time, though the clock is right there, its luminous hands marking 1 in the morning with their faint radioactive glow. I think about the time that stretches between me and Maggie, me and Duluth, me and everything I recognize as my life. 182 days, 6 months, half a year. It sounds manageable when you say it fast. It sounds like a prison sentence when you lie in the dark and count the minutes inside the days, inside the weeks, inside the months. I think about what she's doing right now. It's 10 in the evening in Minnesota. She's in bed probably. Reading, maybe. She likes to read before sleep. Mystery novels mostly, the kind where a detective in an English country house solves murders over cups of tea. She reads with her legs curled under her and her glasses perched on the end of her nose, and she makes little disapproving sounds when the detective misses something obvious. I close my eyes, and I can see her, clear as a photograph, clearer than a photograph, because photographs don't capture the small movements, the way she pushes the glasses up, the way she turns pages with her left hand because her right hand is holding her place in the middle of the book where she bookmarks with her thumb. I reach out and adjust the heater without fully waking. The flame has burned low and the room temperature is dropping. I can feel it on my face, that slight tightening of the skin that means the air has crossed below 55 degrees. I turn the fuel valve a 1/4 turn and the flame brightens, and the amber glow on the ceiling intensifies and the warmth pushes back against the cold seeping through the walls. This is a dance I perform 2 or 3 times a night, a negotiation between fuel conservation and survival comfort that happens mostly below the level of consciousness. The body knows, it registers the temperature drop before the mind does, and the hand reaches for the valve before the thought forms. 6 months of practice has turned thermoregulation into a reflex. Sleep comes eventually. Not deep sleep, the wind won't allow that, but a shallow drifting half-sleep where the world reduces to sensation, warmth from the heater on my right side, the rough wool blanket against my chin, the building's rhythmic flexing, and beneath it all the bass note of the storm, relentless and impersonal as the sea. Chapter 15. 4 in the morning again. The alarm in the storm. The alarm. 4 in the morning. The same clock, the same sound, the same reluctant swing of feet to the cold floor, but everything else is different. Yesterday I woke to silence. Today I wake to a world that sounds like it's being dismantled. The wind hasn't stopped. It's been going for 8 hours now, and it sounds like it has no intention of stopping. The building shakes hard enough that the clock has migrated an inch toward the edge of the crate during the night, nudged by the repeated vibrations. I catch it before it falls. I get dressed and walk to the operations room. The corridor is noticeably colder than yesterday. The wind is finding more gaps, pushing cold air through every imperfection in the building envelope. Fine dust, plywood particles mostly, has shaken loose from the ceiling seams and settled on everything. The fluorescent tube sways on its chain, casting shadows that move with each gust, giving the corridor the disorienting quality of a room on a ship. Peterson looks up when I enter. He's been on since midnight, 8 hours now, with observations every 30 minutes, and his face shows it. The tiredness is in his jaw, which has gone slack, and in his eyes which have that focused but distant quality of a man running on caffeine and duty. How is it, I ask, sustained 40, gusting to 55 at 0300, pressure bottomed at 28.78 around 0200, and I think it's starting to come back up, maybe. He gestures at the barograph. Hard to tell yet. I study the barograph. He might be right. The trace has bottomed out at 28.78, a very deep low for this latitude, and the most recent portion of the line is ambiguous. It's not clearly rising yet, but the rate of fall has decreased. In meteorology, a slowing rate of fall is the first sign that the worst is passing. It means the center of the low is nearby or has just passed, and behind it the pressure will begin to rebuild as the cold air mass fills in. If the center has passed to our south, which is the typical track for these systems, then the wind should begin to shift from northwest to north and eventually to northeast as the system moves away. We might be on the backside of this thing. I'll know better after the 0500 observation. I tell Peterson, get some sleep. He doesn't argue. He pushes back from the desk, takes his coffee mug to the galley, and disappears into the corridor. I hear his boots on the plywood, the creak of his cot, and then nothing. He'll be asleep in 2 minutes, not as fast as Hendricks, but close. 4:45. Time to go out. I've done this hundreds of times. I've done it in calm and wind and snow and darkness and twilight. But every time I stand at this door in storm conditions, there's a moment, just a moment where every part of me says don't. Where the animal brain, the old brain, the brain that evolved on African savannas and has no business being at 69 degrees north, screams at me to stay inside where it's warm and safe and the wind can't reach me. And every time I open the door anyway. Because that's the job, and because the data doesn't collect itself. I open the door and the storm takes my breath. Not figuratively, literally. The wind hits my face, the 1 inch of exposed skin between the goggles and the balaclava, and my lungs lock. It's a reflex. The body simply refuses to inhale air that cold, that fast, that violent. I force a breath through the balaclava fabric and it tastes like wool and ice and nothing. I grab the guide rope with my left hand and step out. The world has disappeared. There is no tundra. There is no sky. There are no instrument shelters, no buildings, no horizon, no up or down. There is only the wind and the snow and the rope in my hand. The flashlight is useless. The beam extends maybe 8 feet before it hits a wall of white and reflects back, blinding me more than helping. I switch it off and navigate by rope alone. Hand over hand. Each step deliberate, planted, tested before I commit my weight. The snow underfoot is hard-packed by the wind, but covered with fresh drift that shifts and slides, and twice I stumble when a gust hits me from a slightly different angle than I expected. The rope is everything. I cannot stress this enough. The rope is my connection to the buildings, to shelter, to survival. If I let go of this rope, I am dead, not probably dead, not potentially dead, dead. Because in a whiteout at -29 with 50-mile-per-hour gusts, a man without a fixed reference is a man walking in circles until he drops. It's happened before, it will happen again, but not to me, not today. I lock my hand around the rope and I don't let go, and I move forward 1 step at a time until my outstretched mitten touches the familiar wooden post that marks the instrument shelter. The thermometers are partly frosted over. Snow has been driven into the shelter through the louvers despite their design, and I have to brush the instruments clean before I can read them. My bare hand is out of the mitten for 45 seconds, 15 seconds longer than my usual limit, and by the time I shove it back into the wool liner and the outer mitten, I've lost all feeling in the fingertips. They'll hurt when they rewarm. The pain of rewarming is worse than the cold itself, a fierce, burning throb that I've come to dread. But the readings are taken. -29. Wind from the north, which is a shift. It was northwest yesterday. The shift confirms it. The center of the low has passed to our south. We're on the backside. The worst is behind us, probably, though. The wind on the backside of an Arctic low can be just as strong as the front side. The difference is trajectory. The system is moving away. The wind will persist for hours, maybe another full day, but it will gradually diminish. I don't bother with visibility. There isn't any. I note visibility near zero in blowing snow. The anemometer? I can't see it. I can't see anything more than 5 feet away. I estimate wind based on the force against my body. Sustained 40, gusting higher. You develop a feel for it. Your body becomes an instrument. At 20 miles per hour, you lean slightly. At 30, you lean hard. At 40, you brace. At 50, you grab something and hold on. I follow the rope back. The station resolves out of the whiteout gradually. First the warm glow of a window, then the dark shape of the wall, then the door frame. I pull myself the last 10 feet and duck inside, and Hendricks, who heard me coming and got up to stand watch at the door, slams it shut behind me. "Data?" he asks. I hold up the clipboard. He takes it without another word and goes back to the sleeping quarters. I peel off the frozen gear, hang the parka where it will drip into a bucket rather than onto the floor, and sit down at the desk. My fingers are burning. The rewarming has started, and it's exactly as bad as I expected. A hot, throbbing ache that radiates from the fingertips up through the hand. I flex them, curl them, press them flat against the warm surface of the coffee mug Peterson left for me. Still half full, still warm. Bless Peterson and his unspoken courtesies. Chapter 16. Dawn That Isn't. The storm begins to ebb. The morning passes in storm time, which is both faster and slower than regular time. Faster because there's always something to do. Monitor the barograph, check the stove, listen to the radio for weather updates from neighboring stations, encode and transmit. Slower because each task is performed inside a cocoon of constant noise and vibration that makes everything feel effortful, deliberate. Like working underwater, I encode the 0500 observation and attempt to transmit. The radio is marginal. The signal gets through on the third attempt, and Fairbanks' acknowledgement comes back garbled but recognizable. Good enough. By 8 o'clock, the barograph tells the story I've been hoping for. The pressure has turned. The line is rising, slowly, tentatively, but unmistakably upward. 28.82 and climbing. The center of the low has passed. We're in the clearing phase now, and while the wind is still howling, there's a qualitative difference that I can feel even from inside. The gusts are slightly shorter. The lulls between them are slightly longer. The building still shakes, but with less conviction. The storm is losing interest in us. The wind drops below 30 sustained around noon, and for the first time in 18 hours, I can go outside without holding the guide rope. The world has been rearranged. Snow drifts have built up against the windward side of the station to a height of nearly 5 feet, solid wind-packed drifts as hard as concrete that I'll need to shovel clear of the doors and vents. The antenna tower is coated in an inch of rime ice that glitters in my flashlight beam like crystal. The instrument shelters are half buried. The anemometer cups are still spinning fast, but the rotation has visibly slowed compared to what it must have been at the storm's peak. I spend 2 hours shoveling. The instrument shelters, the doors, the ventilation intakes, the path to the generator shed. It's hard physical work. The wind-packed snow is dense and heavy, and the shovel blade rings against it like striking wood. But it's satisfying work, the kind of work where you can see progress, where the world gets a little more manageable with each shovelful removed. My back aches, my arms burn, my fingers still tender from this morning's frostbite scare, throb inside the mittens. But the shelters are clear, the doors are clear, and the station is functional again, and the twilight is back. I stop shoveling and look south, and there it is, that pale amber line on the horizon, the midday glow that I watched fade 2 days ago and wasn't sure I'd see again during the storm. It's faint and brief and entirely inadequate as a substitute for actual sunlight, but it's there. The sun is still down there, still circling, still sending its oblique light northward in this meager daily offering. I stand and watch it for a full minute, leaning on the shovel, breathing hard from the work, steam rising from my parka. A minute of amber light. It's enough. Some days it has to be enough. Chapter 17. Afternoon recovery. Digging out and taking stock. The generator survived the night. This was not a certainty. During the November storm, the exhaust pipe iced over and the engine overheated and shut down automatically, leaving us on battery power for 6 hours until the wind dropped enough for Peterson to climb on the roof and clear the ice. This time, the pipe stayed clear, probably because the wind was blowing from the north rather than the northwest, which kept the exhaust outlet on the lee side. Small mercies. I check the fuel level, the oil pressure, the electrical output. Everything is nominal. The generator hums with that steady, reassuring vibration that means all cylinders are firing, all systems are working, and the lights will stay on tonight. The landscape outside has been completely remade. Where 2 days ago the snow surface was relatively flat and smooth, the storm has carved it into a field of sastrugi.
Those wind-sculpted ridges that look like frozen waves, each one aligned with the storm's wind direction, each one hard as stone. You can walk on top of them without leaving a footprint. The wind has also rearranged the drifts around the buildings in patterns that would fascinate a fluid dynamics engineer, sweeping curves and sharp-edged deposits that follow the airflow around obstacles with mathematical precision. The snow knows where the wind went. It remembers every gust, every eddy, every turbulent vortex, and records them in three-dimensional sculpture.
There are days when the Arctic feels like a gallery, and this is one of them. The 1400 observation goes out clean. Fairbanks acknowledges on the first attempt. The ionosphere is recovering with the passing of the storm, and the radio signal is stronger than it's been in 2 days. I transmit a storm summary along with the observation. Peak sustained winds of 40 to 45 miles per hour with gusts to 55, minimum pressure 28.78 inches, visibility near zero for approximately 10 hours, heavy blowing snow. Fairbanks acknowledges this too and adds a brief message. Good work, next system 48 hours. 48 hours, 2 days of relative calm before the next one arrives. In the Arctic, that qualifies as a vacation. 3 o'clock. We eat together. It's soup again, cream of mushroom this time, stretched with extra water and poured over pilot bread. But today it tastes better than it has any right to. Peterson has opened the extra can of peaches, which under normal circumstances we would ration more carefully, but today feels like an occasion. Not a celebration exactly. You don't celebrate surviving a storm that you expected to survive, but there's a release, a loosening that comes when the wind drops and the building stops shaking and the world outside becomes navigable again. It's the same feeling I imagine sailors get when the sea goes calm after rough weather. Not joy exactly, but the absence of dread, which is its own kind of pleasure. Hendricks tells a story. This is unprecedented. In 6 months, Hendricks has not voluntarily told a story. He has answered questions, confirmed observations, expressed minimal opinions about weather systems, and on one memorable occasion complimented the coffee. But a story? An actual narrative with a beginning, middle, and end. This is new territory. The story is about Korea, about a night in a forward observation post above the Chosin Reservoir when the Chinese attacked, and Hendricks's unit was cut off for 3 days. He tells it quietly, without drama, in the same flat, factual tone he uses for weather observations. Wind was bad, maybe 20 below. We had a Coleman stove in the bunker and a case of sea rations, and we just sat there and waited. He pauses, sips his coffee. 3rd night, the wind stopped, got real quiet, and this Chinese soldier walked right up to our position. Just walked up. He was lost, frozen, half dead. We brought him inside and gave him coffee and sea rations, and in the morning we sent him back with a stretcher team. He doesn't add a moral, doesn't explain what the story means. He just tells it, and then he's done, and the silence afterward has a different quality than the silence that usually fills this room. It's a silence of understanding. Peterson and I both know what Hendricks is saying without saying it. We survived something together that matters, even if it was just a storm, even if the stakes were lower than a Chinese assault on a frozen reservoir. The principle is the same. You endure, you help each other, you drink coffee and wait for it to pass. I think that might be the most Hendricks has ever said at one time, and it might be the most important. Chapter 18. Evening, the world returns. The 1700 observation. I'm outside and the air is clean. That's the first thing you notice after a storm. The air has been scrubbed. Every particle of dust, every lingering molecule of smoke from the stove, every trace of human habitation has been blown away and replaced with air that has come from somewhere deep in the Arctic basin. Air that has passed over nothing but ice and snow for 1,000 miles. It tastes like nothing. It tastes like the absence of everything, and after 2 days of breathing recycled interior air flavored with coal smoke and canned food, and the particular funk of 3 men who haven't properly bathed in longer than any of us would like to admit, it's extraordinary. The aurora is back. Not the faint wash of green I saw 2 nights ago, but a full display, curtains of light rippling across the northern sky from horizon to zenith, shifting and folding and reforming in patterns that seem both random and choreographed. The colors are extraordinary tonight. Bright green at the lower edges, shading upward through pale yellow to violet and deep red at the highest rays. The geomagnetic storm that disrupted our radio was also energizing the upper atmosphere, and now that the weather clouds have cleared, the results are spectacular. I stand and watch for 5 minutes.
I should be taking the observation. I should be reading the thermometer and checking the barometer and noting the cloud cover. But some things take priority over data collection, and this is one of them.
Maggie asked me once before I left whether there was anything beautiful about the Arctic. I told her I'd let her know. I should write to her tonight about this, about standing on wind-packed snow at -32 with the aurora overhead and the stars burning through the gaps and the whole sky alive with light that has traveled 93 million miles from the sun, collided with the Earth's magnetic field and ended up here, dancing above a plywood weather station at the top of the world. I write to Maggie. I tell her about the storm. Not the fear, not the cold fingers, not the moment at the door when everything in me wanted to stay inside. I tell her about Hendrix's story, about Peterson's quiet courtesies, about the aurora tonight, which I describe in more detail than my literary abilities probably warrant, but I try. I tell her the peaches were good. I tell her the barometer is rising. I tell her I crossed off another day on the calendar, and that the remaining number is smaller than the completed number now, which means we've passed the midpoint, which means I'm coming home. Not soon. Not as soon as either of us would like, but the arithmetic is moving in the right direction. I don't tell her about the frostbitten fingertips. I don't tell her about the fluorescent tube swaying in the corridor or the snow sifting under the door. I don't tell her about standing in a whiteout holding a rope and knowing that letting go meant dying. She doesn't need that. What she needs is to know that I'm safe, that I'm doing work that matters, and that I'm counting the days. The rest is for me to carry. I seal the letter and set it on the shelf with the outgoing mail. The next supply flight is scheduled for 10 days from now, weather permitting. The letter will sit there, waiting, alongside Peterson's stack of letters and Hendrix's single terse postcard to his brother in Tacoma. Our words pile up at the edge of the world, waiting for wings. Peterson is reading. He's switched from writing to Hendrix's westerns, which is either a sign of literary desperation or genuine curiosity. He catches me looking and shrugs. Hendrix says the Louis L'Amour ones are good. Are they? He considers this for a moment. They're competent. The landscapes are accurate. The dialogue is stiff. The women are decorative. He turns a page, but the man knows what cold feels like. I'll give him that. Chapter 19. Night falls again, settling in. I stand in the doorway for a moment and look at the room, at Hendrix with his headphones, at Peterson with his journal, at the stove with its orange glow, and the instruments on the wall, and the barograph tracing its slow recovery arc, and the logbook on the desk with its pages of careful observations in 3 different hands. This room, this 12 by 16 plywood box at the top of the world. It's not much. It's everything. There's a thing that happens at remote stations that nobody warns you about. You start to love the place. Not despite its hardships, but because of them. Not despite the cold and the dark and the isolation, but through them. The way you might come to love a difficult person, slowly, reluctantly, and then all at once, with a fierce protectiveness that surprises you. I love this station. I love its stubborn plywood walls and its temperamental stove and its leaking door seals and its tiny frosted windows that show nothing but dark. I love the barograph and the way it traces the atmosphere's moods in a thin blue line. I love the way the guide ropes feel in my hand, rough, ice-crusted, certain. I love the sound of the radio when Fairbanks comes through clear, and I even love the static when they don't. I won't miss it when I leave. That's not the right word, but I'll remember it. I'll remember every inch of it for the rest of my life. Chapter 20. Sleep? Tomorrow we do it again. 9 o'clock. I sit on the edge of my cot and pull off my boots. The same cot, the same boots, the same heater glow on the same plywood walls. The day has come full circle, and tomorrow it circles again. 4 in the morning. Alarm, coffee, observation. Encode, transmit, coal, fuel instruments, observation, encode, transmit. The rhythm is relentless, and the rhythm is everything, because without it the days would lose their shape and the shapelessness would swallow us. I wind the alarm clock. The spring tightens with its familiar ratcheting click, storing enough energy for another 16 hours of faithful timekeeping. I set it for 4. I place it on the crate beside Maggie's letter and my wedding band, which I've slipped off my finger the way I do every night. Not because it bothers me in sleep, but because I'm afraid the cold will shrink the metal and I'll lose it. Irrational, maybe. The sleeping quarters are warm enough,
But up here you develop irrational precautions, and you honor them because the rational ones aren't always enough.
I lie on my cot and pull the blanket up and stare at the ceiling. The face in the knot, the loosening seam, the working nail. My old friends, the day is over. It was an ordinary day, or what passes for ordinary at an Arctic weather station during polar night. I took observations, tended instruments, shoveled coal, launched a balloon, ate spam and soup and pilot bread, played cribbage, stood in a whiteout holding a rope, watched the aurora, wrote a letter, and survived a storm. Tomorrow I'll do most of it again. The observations will have different numbers. The barometer will tell a different story. The stove will need coal at different intervals. But the structure will be the same, and the purpose will be the same, and the small satisfactions, a clean barograph trace, a successful radio transmission, a cup of coffee held in both hands, will be the same.
I think about what we're doing here. 3 men in a plywood box, measuring the air. It sounds absurd when you say it that plainly, and some days it feels absurd, standing outside at -40 reading a mercury thermometer by flashlight while your colleagues in Fairbanks and Washington work in heated offices with restaurants downstairs. But the data is real. The observations are real. Every number I write down becomes part of a record that stretches back decades and forward into a future I can't see. A record that tells the story of the atmosphere at this spot on the Earth with a fidelity that no other method can match. 100 years from now, someone might study these observations. They might use them to understand how the climate was changing, how the Arctic was responding to forces we don't even know about yet. The data will outlast me. It will outlast the station. It will outlast every complaint I've ever had about the cold and the food and the darkness.
And there's Maggie. There's always Maggie. In 182 days, I'll walk through the front door of our house in Duluth, and she'll be there, and the house will be warm. Warm in the easy, automatic way of a house with a furnace and proper insulation and walls that don't shake in the wind. And I'll hold her and she'll smell like lily of the valley, and the coffee will be real coffee, fresh ground, not the calcified remnants of a military surplus tin, and she'll hum off-key while she makes dinner and read me the newspaper editorials and fall asleep with her head on my shoulder during the evening program, and all of it. Every ordinary, unremarkable second of it will be the most extraordinary thing I've ever experienced. Because I'll know what it costs. I'll know what it means to be warm when you've been cold, to be together when you've been alone, to be home when you've been at the edge of the world. The heater flickers. I turn the valve a quarter turn and the flame steadies. The building is quiet outside. The wind has dropped to almost nothing, 5 miles per hour, maybe less, and the silence is so complete that I can hear the barograph drum rotating in the operations room 2 walls away, a faint, patient ticking. That means the atmosphere is being recorded, second by second, inch by inch, in a thin blue line on a strip of white paper. Tomorrow the alarm will ring. I'll sit on the edge of this cot and put my feet on the cold floor and pull on my boots and walk to the galley and make coffee and step outside into the dark and read the instruments and come back and write it down. The same as today, the same as yesterday, the same as every day since I arrived and every day until I leave, and it will matter. Not because anyone will thank me, not because the world will notice, but because the atmosphere doesn't stop and someone has to watch it. Someone has to stand in the cold and read the mercury and write the numbers and send them south. Someone has to tend the stove and launch the balloon and hold the rope in the whiteout. Someone has to be here at this particular spot on the Earth at this particular hour paying attention. That's me. That's Frank Hollis, Weather Bureau Observer, Arctic Research Station, Northern Alaska, 1954. And my back aches, and my fingers are sore, and I miss my wife, and I'm tired. But the barometer is rising, and in 2 weeks the sun comes back, and in 182 days I go home. If tonight's journey stirred memories, whether your own, your parents', or stories passed down about remote service, harsh conditions, or the quiet work of keeping things running in places the world forgot about, I'd be honored if you shared them below. Those of you who served at distant early warning line stations, weather ships, radar installations, or any of the lonely outposts that kept watch during the Cold War, your experience is irreplaceable. Those who kept things going on the home front, who waited for letters that took weeks to arrive, who held families together while someone was away, your stories matter just as much. The comment section is yours. Now rest well. Close your eyes, listen to the wind or the quiet, whichever finds you tonight, and I'll see you in the next one. The alarm is set, the stove is fed, the rope is tied. Tomorrow, I do it again.